Hello and welcome to a new tutorial. Today we are going to go through a tutorial for the timestamp microservice project on FreeCodeCamp. Now this project is the first of 5 that you need to complete in order to get your APIs and microservices certification from FreeCodeCamp. I do recommend that you do the challenges that you do all of these challenges before you move on to this tutorial, and also that you give this project a shot before you listen to this tutorial, because the whole point of doing all this FreeCodeCamp learning is to learn. So how I'm going to structure this video is I'm going to give you some high-level overview, try to teach you some high-level concepts about that might help you with this project, and then I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty and show you how I did it with my code. So again, I recommend that you give this project a shot yourself and you figure it out yourself first, but I will give you some help and some direction before I show you the code. And I'm also going to leave timestamps on the screen right now in case you want to just skip ahead. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so APIs and microservices project, timestamp microservice. Build a full stack JavaScript app, so we're using Node.js in the backend, as the backend, that is functionally similar to this. Let's see here, and here we have some tests. But first of all, let's just go and look at roughly what they want us to create. Alright, so they want us to create this. If we go straight down to this usage right here, they want us to create this server that will take in a GET request at these endpoints. So at /API/timestamp, and then we can give it a date. It looks like we can also give it a /API/timestamp a Unix time. In our output, we're going to get that Unix time, and we're also going to get UTC as a JSON object. All right. So we're creating a very basic, very simple RESTful API that's going to give us this kind of object when we give it these URLs. Also, 2 more stories that aren't given in the example usage in this project are described up here. So let's see. This is telling us our API endpoint. Date string. Date string is valid if it can be successfully parsed by new date. Alright, so here we're given a little hint about Unix and about how it needs to be an integer. So we should keep that in mind for later. Alright, so this is the story that is described up in these notes, but not in the example usage. If the date string is empty, it should be equivalent to trigger new date. So we should really have another URL right here that says /API/timestamp, and that's it. That returns our current Unix time and our current UTC time. All right. So if we have a valid date, it's going to return some JSON and say, give us Unix and give us a time. And alright, we already know that. And if it's invalid, it's going to give us this JSON object that says error and invalid date. Alright. So again, like I said earlier, it's going to be very helpful if you go through and do the basic Node and Express challenges before you attempt this project. So what we need to do is we need to set up a Node.js server somewhere, and you don't have to, but it's going to help if we use Express, because what Express is going to do is that it's just going to make it easier for us to process requests from the user and handle API calls and some other things. Alright, so if you don't know already, there is a website called glitch.com. It's glitch.com. And there's a picture of my beautiful face. But on this website, you can get free Node.js hosting. So this is a nonprofit organization that allows you to serve some basic Node.js apps for learning purposes. So I would recommend using this service, and they also offer a in-browser text editor, and that's going to help you out a lot as well. So, not sure what else I can say at a higher level to give you hints before I start showing you my code. I will say that you're going to have to use Node.js and Express, and if you run into roadblocks, I would recommend looking at the Express documentation, looking at W3 Schools for some JavaScript dates, methods, and how you can manipulate dates. I definitely do that first before you try to manually do things, because often there is already a method available for you, so you don't have to create your own thing. And we definitely want to use those kinds of methods. For example, date.toUTC is a method that JavaScript has that you can totally use, so you don't have to create this entire string on your own, because that's going to take a lot more effort and is really just unnecessary when you can just use JavaScript's way of doing it, JavaScript's native way of doing it. Alright, so I think there isn't really much else I can explain at a higher level. It's going to help without looking at the code now. Well, first of all, let's just look at my finished product. So this is my finished product right here. And now as of making this video, I realized that this bad request response should really be JSON instead of a string, but that isn't a huge deal. That can always be changed. So again, just like in our stories here, I have an endpoint for a ISO date, an endpoint for a Unix date. So we have those two stories. So that's this right here, our ISO date, our Unix date. Then we also have a blank date, so where date is blank. And that, in that case, you get now, whatever time now is, in UTC and Unix. And then also we have our invalid date string. So if somebody puts gibberish in the API can say, hey, we aren't going to process that because it is invalid. So let's just test these out real quick. We are going to get September 12th right here. So when we do get requests, we get our Unix time. And also, even though we are given the ISO date in our URL parameter here, it is converted to a UTC date string and returned back to us like so. Now we can also try the Unix version. We should have the same dates. That's correct. All right. It's perfect. And also if we have an invalid date string, again, this should really respond like how it is expected in the microservice, but mine just responds with a string, and that's a pretty easy change to make. So I'm not going to worry about that. All right, so now let's look at the code. So I'm going to leave a link to this page and also the source code, which is on GitHub, that you can take a look at. And also you can take a look at the code on Glitch that I have for this app. And again, I don't condone cheating or anything. If you do watch this tutorial, you should develop the app on your own. But let's get into it. All right, so here is my text editor on Glitch. So when I make a change here, Glitch is going to automatically update my server with any changes I make. All right. So I believe that when you create a new node project in Glitch, it initializes your repository with a few things. For example, it gives you this public directory and this views directory. It might even give you server.js and package.json. But if we were starting this project from scratch, one of the first things we are going to want to do is we are going to want to go over to use either npm or yarn, whatever is your package manager, and run npm init to initialize our repository and generate this package.json file. And then we are going to want to run npm install express and npm install path. So we need express in order to help us manage those queries that are sent to us. You can use Node.js by itself, but Express just helps. And we are also going to use path in order to serve index.html and also help us serve client.js and style.css. All right. So now here is our server.js file. And keep in mind that when you have a big app, not everything needs to be in one file. So if this were an actual app, these endpoints that I have right here might even be in a different file called routes or something like that. Because often things in a production environment are going to be a lot more organized and not in one file. But for this example, it's perfectly fine for everything to be in one file because this is a simple learning project. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we are going to want to pull in Express and Path. Now, I am unsure as of creating this video if Node.js allows ES6 imports, but I do know that if you are developing, say, a React app, that you can say something like this. You can import Express from Express. Looks like that might work. But that is the way you should do it. I'm just going to leave it. But you should be trying to do things the new ES6 way because that's the way apps are being developed now. All right, so we are pulling in Express, the old Node.js way. I'm not sure exactly what EMScript version we had when Require was out. But anyway, we are going to just pull in Express and Path, and we are going to initialize our app by calling Express. All right. So this is the first thing we're going to do in our file, and we are also, this is another one of the first things we're going to do. We are going to give Express access to static files and /public. So this line right here is telling Express, hey, you can use the files in public, you have access to this. And then we also want to send our index.html file, send our index.html file when the user goes to the / path. All right. And now, ignoring our timestamp logic, we are going to skip down and look at this line right here. This is another basic thing with Express that we're going to do. We're going to open our app to requests. So this means that our app is going to listen for clients. And when a client wants to connect, it's going to connect to it and try to fulfill the requests of our clients. I also have a simple console.log right here, so that if we look in the glitch console by clicking Tools, Logs, we can see app is listening on port 3000. That just lets us know that our app is running. All right. So as far as this challenge, you can make your index.html however you like. Style it however you like. I'm not even sure that it is required, but I just did it for mine just for fun. All right, so now let's go and look at our timestamp functions here. All right, so we are going to look at this function first. And so there are really two different endpoints that we need to worry about when we're creating this microservice. So we have /API/timestamp with no query parameter, and we have /API/timestamp with our datestring query parameter. So first of all, let's deal with the scenario where a user makes a GET request to this exact endpoint, and they are expecting us to return a JSON object with Unix and UTC for the current time. So in JavaScript, when you initialize a new date, it automatically is set to the current time. So right here, we're using const because this is the new ES6 way to declare variables. You should always use const unless a variable is going to get reassigned. So we are using const, date equals new date. So this date is equal to now. Then, in order to convert it to Unix, all we have to do is say date.getTime. This is a native function for the date object in JavaScript. Then for UTC, we're just going to simply say date.toUTCString. And again, this is a native function of the date object. So let's test that out again. If I go over to this timestamp, or my bad, if I go over to this API and I click it, it will give me the current time in Unix and in UTC. All right, perfect. So it looks like everything worked because the time on screen was my current time. Now let's take a look at how to handle a request, a ISO date string request. All right, so we have this date string parameter, and in Express, this is how we tell Express that we have a URL parameter by using this colon right here. So we're telling Express, hey, respond to the request at /API/timestamp/ some string. There's some string that somebody can put right there. All right. And so just like our function up here, we are going to start by initializing a date. And here's where things get a little bit more complicated. the URL query parameter is a string. So if you put in 500, that means that the URL query parameter is going to be a string with the value 500. So it is not an integer. Our date object will only accept Unix as an integer. Therefore, we have to convert Unix time from a string to an integer. But we only want to do this conversion, this parseInt conversion, when we have a Unix string. Because we could have an ISO string. So we need to find a way to figure out if our date string is Unix or not. In this example, or in my server.js file, I chose to create a function called isUnix to tell me if a date string is Unix or not. So here we have our isUnix function, request.params.datestring. Now if we go back up here and check out the function, all this is just a simple regex. And this may look confusing, but all this is saying is that this date string needs to have only digits in it. That is all that this regex is saying. This /d means digit. This caret means from the beginning of the string. This money sign means from the end of the string. And this plus sign means one or more occurrences. And so we are initializing a regex right here and saying .test. So we're testing a string and we're testing the date string. All right. So const date equals isUnix, and then we have this question mark right here. This is shorthand for an if statement. So what we're saying is if date string is Unix, this question mark means if, then date equals a new date, and then we are going to parse the integers from that string to turn, so we are going to turn date string from a string into an integer, and then pass that down to date, and then we have our Unix date converted from string Unix to a JavaScript date object. But if we get an ISO date, we are not going to do that. If we get an ISO date, we are going to simply pass down the date string into a new JavaScript object, new JavaScript date object. All right. So now we have this date object, and it could be valid and it could be invalid. So we could have a scenario where somebody says /API /timestamp /invalid_date_string. They could really put anything there that they wanted to. So we want to handle this error. And it just so happens that when you give an invalid date string to a JavaScript date object, and then you try to call date.getTime from that JavaScript date object, that it returns null. So what this means is that, let's go through an example. Let's say we have a valid date string. Date.getTime will return our Unix time as an integer. But if we get an invalid date string, if somebody just throws gibberish in there, our JavaScript date object can't get the Unix time of gibberish. So this will return null in that scenario. And null is a falsy value in JavaScript. Therefore, if we have null, if date.getTime returns null, we are going to return response.status 400, and then we are going to send this bad request string. And again, I know that in the actual challenge we're supposed to send a JSON that says error, invalid date string, but it really isn't a huge difference. I'm just going to leave it be. Now, if we do have a valid date, .getTime, excuse me, if we do have a valid date .getTime, then we are simply going to return a response.json and do the exact same thing we did in this function right here. All right, that is about it. That's all I have time for today. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will answer them as well as I can. Have a good day.